at 9.
Wild food, that's what hunting and gathering is all about. This is a journey into Britain's ancient way of life as we attempt to find the foods eaten by our hunter-gatherer ancestors. In the far northwest of Britain lies a remote, barren and windswept island, a bleak but stunningly beautiful place.
This is the island of Colonsay off the west coast of Scotland. I've come here because an incredibly important archaeological discovery was made here, one that was the inspiration for this journey.
More than 8,000 years ago, our ancestors gathered here to camp, and we know that as remains of their feasting have been found, rare and exciting evidence of what woodland food our ancestors ate. Colonsay is now deforested, but of course back then, in the Middle Stone Age or Mesolithic, like most of Britain, it would have been covered in trees. In this programme, I'm going on a journey to explore the wild food of the woods. I'll be back in Colonsay later, but first I'm heading to the south of England, to a forest which is more like the landscape our ancestors would have known.
If there's one place that I really feel that I can connect with the spirit of our ancestors, it's here in Broadleaf Woodland, particularly at this time of year, the autumn, with so many fungi, nuts and berries to collect. It's incredibly exciting. But of course, back in the Mesolithic, it would have been a very busy time.
Back then, the hunter-gatherer would have had to make the most of this time to gather for the coming winter, and would have been acutely aware of what was available.
Of course, the forest itself was the very fabric of our ancestors' life. It was their supermarket, their drugstore, their hardware store, all things rolled into one. And it was vital that they had an understanding of all the materials that grew around them. And this is a sallow, one of the goat willows, and the bark on these withes here is excellent cordage. The shoots can be woven into baskets, and if you take the ends of the branches and chew the bark up at the end, actually see, I don't know whether you can see there, that's the last year's bark. You chew that, you get a very strong astringent taste, just like aspirin. And this contains salicylic acid and was one of the ancient medicines that were used. In fact, aspirin was derived from salicylic acid, which was originally found in willow barks. So everything around you, if you lived back in those days, was of importance.
One of our most ancient and iconic trees is this, the oak.
The mighty oak tree has played a very significant role in Britain's recorded history, but it may also have been important in our prehistory. In other parts of the world, where you find acorns, you find hunter-gatherers using them as a staple food. What we'd like to know is whether they were used in that way here as well.
Joining me on this journey of discovery is my friend, Professor Gordon Hillman from University College London. He's a paleo-ethnobotanist, and come rain or shine, spends his time studying the relationship between plants and people. The technique we're going to use to process the acorns is one which we've seen modern-day hunter-gatherers use around the world.
Worldwide, we find that wherever acorns are available, people use them, even if they have other sources of starch. And the reason for this is they are very nutritious. They contain not just carbohydrates, but also fats, and a bit of protein too. In Britain we have two species, and both of them are generally very bitter. And this bitterness is due to tannins. It's a bit like chewing a tea bag. It's pretty bitter. When people use these things worldwide, people were prepared to go to the trouble of getting rid of the tannins by often quite complicated methods in order to get this nutritious resource in their diet.
How's it going, Gordon?
It's a bit damp.
There's a severe weather warning in place today. I think we're doing really well, but I was thinking about that and thinking about our ancestors doing this, and I've often wondered whether this seasonal resource induced them to move their whole communities for a period of time to oak woodland, because it's a long process, it's very involved, and then you could place yourself there and make a proper roof.
That's right, we've got the acorns and everything on the spot.
Yeah.
And of course the Chumash in California, that's exactly what they did. They apparently moved the whole camp for 2 weeks to the acorn grounds, up into the hills.
Gordon has split the nuts before drying them, as it makes it easier to remove their shells, which has to be done before crushing. Archaeological evidence of such processing is slim, but combining it with our knowledge of modern hunter-gatherers around the world, we can begin to get a picture of what might have been in Britain.
Some groups in North America actually chose to use the most bitter ones because they had a higher fat content, even though sweet ones were available. So obviously these fats are obviously one of the important nutrients they're after. And I think fat from plant foods is actually quite a rarity in nature. So that's something they're particularly targeted with acorns.
The next process is to take this meal that we've ground up with the acorn meal and put it into a bag which we can put into a stream so that the water will wash out the tannins. This is the sort of bag that Aboriginal people use in Australia for a similar process to leach toxins from edible roots. But this is too open a weave for the acorn meal, so I can't use that. In fact, it's one of the pieces from the archaeological jigsaw that's totally missing, is these sorts of tools. They just don't survive from our Stone Age past. So instead of a bag like this, we're going to improvise with a little bit of modern technology and use a mosquito head net, which is a very fine weave, will hold the meal and still allow the toxins to pass through.
Another method for leaching could have been by putting the meal onto a bed of sand and then pouring water over so that the sand would act like a sieve.
So, we'll put this in the stream, get it good and wet first. You can see the tannin coming out there. See that colour? Now I'm going to tie that off and leave that to leach.
Gordon and I now have a chance to explore further and build a bigger picture of our ancestors' lives. Thousands of years ago, after the Ice Age, Britain was covered in dense forests of pine and birch. But these were slowly replaced by other trees such as beech, elm, oak, and hazel.
The forests that our Mesolithic ancestors knew would have been a little different to the ones we know today. One of the trees that they would have been very familiar with is this, the lime tree. We know from archaeological records that the wood of the trunk was sometimes hollowed out to make dugout canoes, but they would almost certainly have made good use of the bark, maybe making bark canoes, bark containers, perhaps even living in houses made from bark of the lime tree. Certainly the inner bark was used for string. It's an incredibly useful tree. Today we only really see it in parks.
Of course, there are trees we think of as native, but which wouldn't have been around in the Mesolithic. For example, the horse chestnut tree, which was introduced into Britain in Roman times, as was the sweet chestnut.
Lovely.
Continuing our journey through the woods, today Gordon and I